Hi, my name is Selisha Griffiths. I'm a master's student at Winchester University studying animal welfare, behaviour, ethics and law in 2023. This seminar is on the welfare concerns of horse racing in Britain and will examine the main welfare concerns such as fatality and injury, equipment use, life after racing and mistreatment. Horse racing has a long and rich history within Britain and can be traced back to the 12th century, and has grown in popularity over hundreds of years until recently. Whilst there is currently 10,000 racehorses in the UK and over 1,000 meets over 363 days annually, horse racing attendance is in decline. In-person attendance figures have reduced each year, and it has actually reduced by 14% since 2019 to 2021. There are two types of horse racing: flat racing and jump racing, which can involve jumping over hurdles or fences. The British Horse Racing Authority, commonly referred to as BHA, are an independent governing body and have been since 2007. There are many welfare concerns in British horse racing. These include death and euthanasia, usually due to fatal injuries such as leg breakage, head trauma, and more, mainly through failed jumps during racing. Other issues include equipment use during races, such as whips, although this equipment is heavily monitored by the BHA. Another welfare concern is how horses are cared for after their retirement and whether they are slaughtered, euthanized, or mistreated after their racing career has ended. Mistreatment is another cause for concern, which could occur prior to, during, or post-race, and there is growing concern from the general public over how the horses are treated, as there is limited information on this by owners, trainers, and caregivers. There is also a concern about the use of negative punishment for training within the equine industry, although there has been a recent shift over to a more balanced approach using more positive reinforcement techniques. This is just an overview of the main welfare concerns, so now we'll look into each one in more depth. A number of racehorses' careers end due to fatality on the track yearly, and can occur over both jump and flat racing, although there is considerably more deaths during jump races. As you can see from Figure 2, 223 racehorses died in 2021, with 160 during jump racing and 63 during flat racing. One of the largest contributors to this number are horses which sustain leg injuries and will often have euthanasia performed on the spot. This is a particular cause for concern, as 84.5% of the general public are concerned about the risk of injury to the horse. A reason for leg injuries often becoming fatalities is due to horses having a low bone density to help them travel faster. However, it also means that they are very delicate and leg breakages are difficult to treat and will often become a recurring injury. If injuries do not result in fatality, they can significantly alter the horse's life and quality of life. Typical injuries from racing include leg breaks, fractures, heart failure, heart attacks, exhaustion, head trauma, and exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, or EIPH. Some of these injuries are extremely difficult to treat and can still lead to fatality or euthanasia if the projected outcome for the horse's life is insufficient or would cause greater pain. It is worth mentioning that there have been a number of improvements to races to try to prevent fatality and injury over recent years. For example, there are increased veterinary and physiotherapy checks prior to racing, and they require a veterinary professional to sign off that the horse has no current medical issues that could worsen by racing, or have an increased risk of a medical issue developing by racing. Due to leg-related fatalities providing major concern to the general public and those within racing, There have been many developments to try and ease this issue. One major improvement is the development of casts which can be used on the racetrack after a horse falls to then ensure that they are able to receive X-rays and determine whether the injury can be treated. This is a major development that is still being rolled out in races across the country, but it is not used for every leg-related injury if veterinarians on the site determine that treatment is not a viable option. Over recent years, there have been significant changes to the dimensions and materials of hurdles used in jump racing. This is to help reduce the risk of injury when horses are competing and prevent painful impact if the horse does not jump over the hurdle cleanly. The obstacles have been reduced in height and are usually made of a flexible brush material to allow horses to pass through if they choose to, although this is not always the case for fences, and these are a lot more rigid in structure. There was also a study by Paul and Stevens in 2020 which found that the usual orange-coloured fences were difficult for horses to see, as seen here. In Figure 4, fluorescent yellow colour provided the most contrast, with white being the second highest contrast. Following this discovery, the BHA announced in 2022 they were planning to change all obstacles painted orange to white to help the horses to see clearer. They opted not to paint them fluorescent yellow as they claim it would be harder to maintain. Whilst painting it white is definitely an improvement for the horses and likely reduce falling due to not seeing the obstacle, those committed to change could argue that choosing yellow would have provided a higher welfare for the horses. This change has not fully been implemented as of yet, and it is still being rolled out over the end of this season. Equipment use is also a welfare cause for concern within racing, with the main issue being the use of whips. Whips are typically used to encourage the horse to not lose momentum within the race and are also used for safety across all equine sports. The whip was redesigned in 2009 by the BHA and the RSPCA and features more padding and softer materials than its predecessor to reduce the discomfort of the horse when the whip is being used. There are strict rules for whip use within British racing, and there are now limits on when, where, how often, and how much force can be used. These rules are enforced by the BHA, and any jockey misusing the whip can face bans on racing and heavy fines. The darker text box shows the rules of whip conduct, but there will likely be more restrictions in place in the near future. A survey by Beaver and Kuruku in 2022 found that 55% of the general public believe that whips should be banned. There have also been studies which look into the effectiveness of whips as encouragement and found that there was a link between horses falling and increased whip use. This could suggest that there are even more welfare concerns around the use of whips, as not only could they be harming the horse physically, they could also be damaging welfare through potentially causing more horses to fall and sustain injuries under its use. Other studies have found that the use of the whip impacts the horse's affective states, and there is a link between whip use and being less trusting of humans and generally more nervous as horses. This implies that the use of whips is still uncomfortable to horses and is still a cause for concern due to this. The BHA have tried to ease these concerns with the new restrictions. However, as more research is conducted around the discomfort of using a whip on horses, the welfare of the horse is still being impaired through their use. Concerns have also been raised that there is not sufficient post-retirement care offered to horses, as 73.6% of the general public are concerned about the fate of racehorses. However, the BHA provides guidance on the options that can be provided to retired racehorses. These include moving to sanctuaries, sold to new owners, learning new disciplines such as showing, eventing, dressage, polo, show jumping, hacking, and riding club activities. Euthanasia is another option for retired horses, although there is an ethical decision-making tree to help owners decide if this is the right option. Another alternative until recently was slaughter at abattoirs. A BBC expose from 2021 found that more than 4,000 British racehorses have been slaughtered in British and Irish abattoirs since 2019 for meat consumption in the human food chain. This was a major concern. However, the BHA addressed this and announced that British racehorses would be prevented from entering abattoirs and entering either the human or animal food chain. However, this legislation only prevents horses that have been bred and trained in Britain from going to abattoirs, and those from Ireland and other countries could still be slaughtered in Britain. However, the BHA are currently liaising with international officials to make this legislation a baseline. There is mounting evidence that mistreatment for racehorses occurs both whilst training and also after retirement if the horse is not slaughtered or euthanized. It is important to note that there has been a frequent debate around mistreatment of equines across all sports, as many figureheads conduct ethically questionable practices, not just those in horse racing. Mistreatment can be abuse or neglect and could be included within training regimes following the quadrants of operant conditioning. For example, the use of the whip as a punishment as opposed to a cue would be considered positive punishment, as it could be painful or detrimental to the horse. Trainers are not required to follow set rules when it comes to the techniques of their training, and it was stated by McGreevy and McLean in 2009 that the use of negative punishment is relatively commonplace in equine training. This was evident in a viral video of Sir Mark Todd, an Olympic equestrian, in February 2022, where he was training a horse to wade through water using a tree branch to whip the horse forward. In the video, the horse and rider were visibly distressed, and though Mark Todd received a suspension, it was only for 4 months, and he only served 2 of them. Perhaps most shocking in this area is the cavalier nature of racing trainers and jockeys around horse deaths. One incident that prompted this welfare concern was a photo circulating on social media with trainer Gordon Elliott sitting atop a dead horse answering his phone. These types of incidents prompt further questions of whether racehorses within the care of trainers are being met with a good quality of life, and whether more transparency between treatment and training facilities are required. Whilst there are new rules within horse racing set by the BHA to prevent poor welfare of horses, the general public is still extremely divided on whether these efforts are enough. Leading experts have suggested that more should be done not only to reduce fatalities and injuries, but also to improve their quality of life. Critics have suggested that there needs to be a focus within equine sports on using training techniques that do not harm or cause pain to the horses. Many critics outside of equine sports have suggested prohibiting the whip altogether to try and curb its use as a punishment, as opposed to encouragement and safety. Fatality occurs on and off the racetrack to thoroughbred horses, as they are so delicate, which has led to environmental groups calling for the end of breeding racehorses to prevent the health issues and painful deaths that racehorses are often exposed to. With all this in mind, it is clear to see that the welfare of horses in racing is improving, but the question remains on how ethical it is overall. Without clearer information and improvements being provided by the BHA and those involved in racing, it is likely that horses will continue to suffer. Mounting pressure upon the governing bodies and lack of in-attendance figures means that the welfare concerns addressed within this seminar may be able to be addressed as radical changes are required to ease both the general public and those within the animal welfare industry. Thank you for watching. Please see my reference lists on the next slides.